We're talking about litigating truck and brain injury cases. Why are these cases so difficult? Well, first off, there are 7 reasons that we've been able to point out time and time again about what makes these cases unique, different, and difficult for us to be able to litigate. The first one is the brain is incredibly complex to understand. Second, the initial testing, known as Glasgow Coma Scale, CTs and MRIs, are usually normal. Third, the brain injury victim has difficulty articulating what is going on in their own lives to loved ones, lawyers, and providers. Fourth, these injuries go undiagnosed by emergency medical doctors and undetected by lawyers in intake. Fifth, brain injury victims just don't look injured. Sixth, insurance adjusters and defense attorneys do not understand these injuries. And the 7th reason is there's a risk of settlement and verdict that does not compensate the client for a lifetime of permanent brain injuries. At our law firm, Nares PLC, we protect brain injury victims from financial ruin by alleviating their fear of an uncertain future and helping them regain their independence. Let's talk about the brain. There's between 86 and 100 billion neurons in the brain. Neurons receive sensory input from the external world and relay those signals to the body. Each neuron has about 10 to 40,000 branches. Neurons and branches make up a fiber tract. The fiber tracts are like telephone wires that connect different parts of the brain. Well, how can the brain get injured? Well, there's 2 types of injuries that we typically see. One is a focal injury, where the injury occurs to a particular site of impact, such as hitting your head on a steering wheel or against a headrest. But the most common mechanism of a TBI tends to be caused by acceleration and deceleration forces, known as coup-contra-coup, which causes a diffuse injury throughout the brain. It is possible to get both a focal injury and a diffuse injury. For instance, you might hit your head, causing your head to then bounce forward and backwards. You'll have a focal injury and a diffuse injury. Brain injury symptoms are not immediate. Characteristics of brain injuries are either primary or secondary. Primary injuries occur immediately after the impact and is a direct result of the mechanical trauma. So for instance, immediately after the wreck, you may lose consciousness. You may feel dizzy, disoriented, be throwing up, have extreme headaches. Those are experienced immediately upon impact. The secondary brain injury, however, occurs hours or days after the initial traumatic event, and it arises from complications initiated by that primary injury, such as inflammation, cell receptor mediated dysfunction, free radical and oxidative damage, calcium or iron building up in the brain. Cerebral damage is a common secondary injury as well. We typically notice injuries to get more severe over the course of 2 weeks post-wreck. This is exactly why a lot of severe injuries are missed by EMS and ER staff and lawyers at intake, because the injuries haven't even come to their full fruition by the time they are being evaluated. So the Glasgow Coma Scale, let me talk to you about this one. Brain damage is largely unaffected by EMS and ER specifically because of this scale that was introduced back in 1988 and measures loss of consciousness. Well, the problem is that EMS and ER take a long time to get to a scene after trauma. This is because someone has to witness the incident, has to call 911, dispatch has to get EMS to the scene, and if EMS doesn't do this test and it's done at the ER, we're now talking an hour to 2 hours post-incident. You don't have to lose consciousness to sustain a brain damage, and brain injury victims might not know that they lost consciousness. You have to ask witnesses, ask about gaps in events to figure out if this even happened. So when EMS or ER look at an injured victim, they're going to look at their eyes and whether their eyes open spontaneously. They're going to look at verbal cues, whether they are able to conversate normally, and motor skills, and whether they're able to have normal flexion and normal pain stimuli. You may lose consciousness, regain consciousness, and be fine after EMS or ER come to the scene and, an hour later. For that reason, you're going to get a 15 a perfect score on the Glasgow Coma Scale, even though you might have lost consciousness. This is just a very, very poor way to do this. It was essentially created to be able to detect immediate trauma in combat zones. It is still used today quite frequently, and adjusters and defense attorneys love to attack clients based on this examination. Brain damage is largely also undetected by EMS and ER doctors. First off, the MRI and CT scan, they measure anatomical changes to the brain, such as skull fractures and subhematomas, or brain bruises or bleeding. They're not tracking physiological changes. For that reason, a dead person would have a normal MRI or CT. It's very common to have a normal MRI and CT and have objective evidence of a traumatic brain injury by other tests. So how do we objectively see the brain damaged? Well, diffuse tensor imaging, or DTI, fiber tracking seems to be the best available resource at this time. It tracks movement of water through the fiber tracks. Water moves longitudinally through a healthy fiber track. Think of it like a tube, a hose, a garden hose, something like that, that water would freely flow through. Well, when it's damaged, those molecules, water molecules, aren't going to freely go through the tube like it normally is. They're going to be diffuse. They're going to go everywhere. Think of it kind of like a Kleenex versus a newspaper. When damaged, those molecules will spread out. So when you have a damaged fiber track, it can twist and turn on each other, known as shearing. And exotic shearing is when it can eventually cause that fiber track to die. When that fiber track dies, those water molecules are no longer going through the fiber track as it once did before. The result is that the DTI is going to show these gaps in areas where there's water molecules no longer flowing through the fiber tracks. So what are the symptoms of brain damage? Well, there's lots of symptoms, and they typically are coordinated with different lobes of the brain. When you have a focal injury to a specific spot in the brain, you might find that your symptomology tends to be focused around that particular lobe. But when you have diffuse injury, like most of our clients do, you'll notice symptoms that range all over the brain in various lobes. We use this chart routinely with our clients to check off the symptoms they have to notice whether it's centralized to a particular lobe or diffuse throughout. And we routinely ask them about activities of daily living that they're having difficulty doing. We recommend doing this very often, initially upon sign up, and every 30 days. Next, we gather non-economic witnesses. We really want to talk to those witnesses that are before and after witnesses that knew our clients before and after the collision. We talk to them about physiological changes that they've noticed in our clients, cognitive changes, emotional changes, and sleep changes. These witnesses can be family members, friends, colleagues, or even acquaintances. Think about like a barista. If you go to get coffee every day and have small conversations with that barista, they may actually notice some changes and be perfect witnesses. You're going to ask about those symptoms often, like we said, about every 30 days. Treating providers for traumatic brain injuries typically include physical, medical, and rehabilitation specialists, neurologists, neuropsychs, psychiatrists, neuroendocrinology, neurooptometry, urology, and other specialists. Remember, the brain is the main functioning house of the entire body. So if you have brain damage, you may have damage to other organs that are being controlled by the brain. That's why internal medicine, pain management, pulmonology, and audiologists sometimes are involved. Treatment is going to include cognitive, behavior, and vestibular therapy. Medications have a large array that can both treat seizures and headaches and depressive symptoms, as well as sleep disorders. It is not uncommon for benzos to also be prescribed as well as stimulants. For this reason, there's a slew of side effects that unfortunately come about with the medication given to traumatic brain injury victims. A VNG is another great way to find objective testing of a brain injury. Remember, our clients typically have gotten a brain MRI or brain CT that was normal. However, their symptomology clearly shows something's wrong. The VNG is a perfect objective way to show what is going on. It's called video nystagography. It's a test that measures a type of involuntary eye movement called nystagmus. It's used to rule out if there is a disorder of the vestibular system, balance structures in your inner ear, or in the part of the brain that controls balance. Symptoms to look for are nystagmus, which is involuntary eye movements, tinnitus, pressure in the ear, vertigo, dizziness, and confusion. There are 3 types of tests that are done in this particular VNG testing, which only lasts about 45 minutes to an hour. It is non-invasive. You wear a headset with goggles that typically will at most create some pressure sensation or fatigue to the eyes, but nothing more. It's going to capture your involuntary eye movements during 3 tests. First test is ocular testing. Watch the eye movement of a dot on a light bar. Positional testing, where you move your head and body in different positions. And caloric testing. Warm or cool air, bursts of air are put into each ear. What's great about the VNG is it's objective testing that is undisputed. First, it's going to show normal tracking to someone that has not sustained a traumatic brain injury. For someone that has sustained a traumatic brain injury and has vestibular issues, their eye movements are going to be slowed or rapidly increased, causing abnormal tracking. Now, why do these cases matter? Well, there's no such thing as a small traumatic brain injury. It's permanent damage. Lifetime of injuries, mood disorders, depression, PTSD, anxiety, excessive daytime sleeping, post-traumatic epilepsy, and as a consequence, a lot of traumatic brain injury victims cannot keep jobs, resulting in lost or diminished wages. They have ruined relationships, and suicide is heightened for traumatic brain injury victims. Large recoveries are possible, which is necessary because this is a lifetime damage and requiring lifetime treatment. If you have any other questions about brain injury cases, both having sustained a brain injury yourself, know someone that has sustained a brain injury, or an attorney that is litigating a brain injury case, feel free to contact us at any time.